same team that designed some of the previous twin engine transports like the Electra, the Hudson Lodestar, and others, and also the Constellation. You can see the family lineage in all those airplanes. In any case, 10,000 of them were built. They basically flew in most of the theaters of World War II, particularly shined down the Pacific with the Americans, and they were also used in North Africa and also used in Europe, also the Mediterranean to Italy, things like that. So the airplane was kind of all over the map as far as in theater. It wasn't in every theater, but it was used pretty heavily. As I said, about 10,000 were built, and about probably 6 or 8 major subtypes. They're built out here by Lockheed in Burbank. I believe it was the only airplane that was in production at the beginning of the war. Is this correct, Tom? From the very beginning of the war to VJ Day, the P-38 was in production the entire time. Is that correct? Yeah. So anyway, beautiful airplane, obviously very distinctive with twin engine, twin boom design. All the armament on the fighter version is all centralized in the front pod. Many of our top aces flew the P-38. Dick Bond was the highest scoring United States ace, 40 kills. Tommy McGuire had 38 kills, and then there were several other P-38 aces that were high ranking. The airplane really shined down the South Pacific, and was really quite an ace maker down there, especially with the 475th Fighter Group and also the 49th Fighter Group. So anyway, today our P-38 is scheduled to fly after the event. Once the event is done, we all go outside. Anywhere on the compound is a great view. The airplane will be doing several circuits overhead. Anywhere is a good view. They'll usually do two or three or four circles around, circuits around, so we can all get a good look at it, some nice turns and all that. So that's what we do after we're done with the program. Our first guest speaker flew with the United States Army Air Force in World War II. He flew 34 combat missions in the P-51 Mustang and another 34 missions in the P-38 Lightning as part of the 434th Fighter Squadron, including flying air cover for the D-Day Normandy landings on June 6, 1944. Please welcome Lieutenant Colonel Walter Drake, United States Air Force, retired.
I'm his third out of 4 sons, and my name is John, and we're just going to do a little Q&A back and forth. So you ready? Ready. Okay. You flew P-38, started out in P-38. When did you arrive in England?
I arrived in England was probably in March of 1944.
Okay, and you were a replacement pilot for the 479. And what did you do in kind of that month lead up to June 6th?
June 6th, as you recall, that was D-Day when we invaded Europe. And beginning of the first part, last part of May, and the first part of June, our jobs were just patrolling the beachhead and strafing dive bombing behind beaches in France and Belgium and the lowland countries. And then on about June the 3rd or 4th, they came in and painted the black and white stripes on our wings and our fuselage. We all wondered, why are they doing that? And it was for identification purposes, and they waited till the last minute because they didn't want the Germans, I guess, to know what we were doing. So we would be easily recognized over the troops when they were landing.
So talk about on June 6th, what time did you guys get up in the morning? What was that first flight across the channel?
Well, we'd get us out of bed probably 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. We'd go have breakfast and we'd go light on the liquid because we might be in this airplane for several hours. And we'd take off in pairs. And our main job that day was we patrolled the beachheads from Calais to Bordeaux, down to Bordeaux, France, which is about 200 mile run. And our sole job that day, the days that we patrolled, was to keep the Germans out of the sky. General Eisenhower was the theater commander, and he wanted to control the skies, and he did. In those days, even up to the day of the invasion, I didn't see one German in the sky.
Now on D-Day, there was kind of a heavy marine layer that came in, so you were flying flying above the invasion beaches, but you couldn't see the beaches.
Unless you got below that layer that was in the, maybe 4,000 feet, so if you get down to maybe 2,000 or 3,000 feet, you could have a pretty good view of what was happening down there. And I never saw so many ships in my life as they were crossing that channel. It's only 22 miles wide at the narrows, and so the whole channel was full of troop ships landing and Navy vessels shelling the shoreline before our troops arrived. And A-26s and B-26s were flying over and strafing and dive bombing behind the line. And we were patrolling to keep the Germans out of the sky.
Now, you described when you saw the A-20 with the gliders that they were pulling.
Well, the C-47s were pulling the gliders, and that day we had over 400 C-47 towing gliders, so we landed something like 15,000 men in about 6 hours behind the beachhead. And so the sky was just full of C-47s all flying. Our job was still keeping the Germans out of the sky, and we'd fly above them and just watch them fly and cut the gliders loose and land it wherever they could.
So, how many missions do you fly on June 6th?
We didn't carry any drop tanks. We carried a lot of ammunition and some dive bombs for dive bombing, so we didn't have drop tanks. So we could get maybe 3.5, 4 hours, and we'd maybe fly 2 and sometimes 3 missions because it didn't get dark till about 11 o'clock at night. They were on double daylight saving time. And so we would fly, go back, refuel, and go right back to replace the squadron that was there before us. So we had full-time coverage of those beachheads.
So for about the next 2 or 3 days, you're flying over the D-Day beaches, and then they reassign your unit to begin going after rail lines, roads, bridges. What was it like to go after a train?
Well, it was going after a train. Was the Germans would bring their troops up the train, and they'd bring them up on ships on the Rhine River. And so our job after the invasion was to strafe the trains and the barges on the Rhine River. And strafing was, to me, it was a lot more dangerous. The chances you weren't going to make it than high-level aerial combat. If you got hit at low altitude, there's no chance to get out. But anyway, that's what we did for about 4 days after the invasion to stop them from the Germans from bringing their troops up to the front line.
So you're flying the P-38 to start out with, and tell them one of the things you really liked about the P-38.
Oh, the great thing was you get engine shot out, you could come home.
How many times did you have an engine shot out?
I was shot out twice, and when you're 400 or 500 miles in enemy territory and you've lost an engine, it's a lonesome journey home because you're all alone, everybody's been broken up, and that's when you wonder if you're ever going to make it back.
You know, one of the interesting things you told us is that you would go into a mission with the full squadron with you, and then when if it was a dogfight or if you got into doing a lot of shooting, after the shooting stopped, you couldn't find any of your own planes around you.
Well, that's true because in a squadron there were 16 planes, and in a group there were 3 squadrons. So we got into a dogfight. By then we were escorting bombers, and we get all broken up and lost track of one another, and sometimes we wind up just 1 or 2 of us, or maybe alone. And we cover a wide area, so it was been a lonely situation when you found yourself like that, and then trying to find your way back to England.
In August, on or about August 11th, 1944, your unit attacked a airfield east of Paris at Nancy, France. Tell us about that fight.
was a German airfield called Nancy SA, which is down pretty close to the Swiss border, southern France. And our commanding officer was Colonel Hubzinski, and he was quite a figure and a legend in Air Force circles. And so he was our leader that day, and we found this German airfield, a lot of German planes on the field. They hadn't taken off yet. So the colonel assigned one squadron to stay above and for protection, and the squadron I was in would go down and strafe that airfield. And it was a great day for us that day because we got several all on the ground that day. They didn't get off the ground. And so it was a day that the whole unit got a citation for destroying so many German planes on the ground.
He didn't mention it, but he got credit for destroying 3 German aircraft that day. And that was one of the times as you were pulling away from a strafing run, the Germans were using their anti-aircraft guns at you, and you lost an engine.
That's one time I lost an engine and feathered it, and cut my automatic wrenching control back so I wouldn't burn fuel as fast, and went home. And it was about a 300 or 400 mile trip getting home on one engine. And the P-38 was, and we were flying P-38Js at the time. And the J model did not have aileron boosters. And so it was to roll that airplane or to turn it, it took both hands on the wheel and rudder. And when I got back to the States, I did get to fly to L as an instructor. That was so that you could almost fly the airplane with one hand on the wheel.
As you got to tail end of September, you're going to convert over to P-51s. You're going to start making a lot of long-range missions into Germany on bomber escort. Talk about what that was like.
Well, they took our P-38s away from us and gave us brand new P-51Ds. And the main reason they told us at the time was that the P-51 had a greater range, and we could go all the way to Berlin, Prague, Munich, and most distant German cities with a P-51. And that's right, we could get that distance out of the P-51s. We would carry drop tanks, usually 75 gallon each one, or we carry 100 gallon drop tanks. And if we did get into a fight going in, and we were doing escort work for bombers, why we could keep our tanks and fight over Berlin or even as far as I got was Prague, Czechoslovakia, and get home. And so the P-51 was probably the plane that kind of turned the air war in our favor in European theater.
You got into numerous dogfights. What was it like? What did you have to do to try to get yourself in a position to shoot down enemy aircraft?
Well, I was in several dogfights, but I was never very, very good at it.
You're here.
I did shoot down one ME-109. But there was no skill on my part. He just got in front of me and I happened to pull it.
Honesty, you gotta love it.
That's the truth. But anyway, it was we got the P-51, so I would say that gave us a greater range than with the P-38.
On October 30th, 1944, you're going to have a mission that Zimsky's going to lead, and it ends up being a fairly dramatic mission. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, it was a mission that we took off. They were P-51s now, and we were supposed to pick up the bombers over Hanover, Germany, and bring them home. And we got that over to Hanover, which is very close to Berlin, the clouds were building up, and huge clouds. And visibility was becoming very poor, and we never could find the bombers coming off the target. So Colonel Zimsky said, well, we're going to go through this. And big mistake. Because we started to go through it, I got on his wing, my wingman got on my wing, and the four of us started through this climbing, and we got maybe at 25, 30,000 feet, and the clouds were still above us. I mean, these thunderheads were probably 40, 50,000 feet there. And the next thing I remember, we're on instruments, and the next thing I remember, my oxygen mask cord, hose was hanging down in front of my face, my radio cords were hanging down, and then I knew I must be upside down. When vertigo sets in, you don't know whether you're upside down or what you're doing. Your brain doesn't seem to work, and that's what happened. And got caught in this updraft, and then I get caught in the downdraft, and I lost complete control of the P-51. It was just bobbling me around, up and down, and I watched that altimeter build up, so I knew I must have gone straight out. And then the altimeter was unwinding, I just went straight down. The airspeed was built up maybe at 350 miles an hour. And so finally, with the only thing I remember, my instructor in flight school said, you can fly needle ball airspeed on instrument. And so, of course, my gyros had tumbled. So all I had left was the needle ball, the airspeed, and the rate of climb would work. And I finally got the airplane under control and pulled out over Germany and, must have been a couple thousand feet above the landscape. And the thing that saved my life, I pulled over 9 Gs coming out of this dive. We had G-suits when they gave us the brand new P-51. The G-suit was explained to us, a flight surgeon explained it had bladders in the leg and bladders across the stomach. And when you pull G's, those bladders would fill up and keep the blood from leaving your brain. Otherwise, you pass out. And so I pulling all those G's out, that G-suit actually saved my life. Because I didn't black out. And so I finally, I was the only one that got back from R4 and England. And the airplane was stressed pretty heavily, but I learned later that they couldn't repair the doggone thing, so I don't know whatever happened to it.
This is the mission that he's going to crack. He's going to bail out when the wing rips off the side of the plane, and he's going to land, go into a German POW camp, and some people have written about that experience from him. You come out of this dive, and now you got to do dead reckoning to figure out which is the way back to England. And so tell them a little bit about this experience.
Well, I knew generally where I was in Germany, and I knew generally where the headings were. So if you were off 5 or 10 degrees, and you could miss England by that much, you'd wind up in that North Sea. And very few pilots survived in that North Sea. So anyway, when I recovered, I got to over 5,000 feet, and I called England on the radio so they could triangulate me and give me a heading home. And I got this direction to make this 50 or 60 degree turn left. That doesn't quite sound right, but I didn't think I'd have to make that much of an adjustment. And so I ignored it, and fortunately I did, because we found out later that, well, we knew, I guess, from right at the beginning, that the Germans had good speaking English people that would lure you back in. And so I didn't follow that directly name or the voice, and finally England got a hold of me, and my triangulation, and got me back to England.
So he kind of skipped over it, but he crossed the coastline is well out into the ocean when he's doing this. And then he's not hearing anything. Nobody's responding back. And so maybe 20, 30 minutes over the ocean, he finally gets this message that turned like 45 degrees.
If they said maybe 5 or 10 degrees, I would have not believable. It turned 40, 45 degrees. I knew I wasn't that far off in my direction heading for England, so I ignored it, fortunately. And then when I got a little closer, I got the English triangulation, and steered me home.
And myself and my three brothers are happy he did. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And we'll be fielding some more questions after the speakers are done, the Q&A from the audience, so. Okay, our next guest speaker has a unique and interesting background serving in the United States Army Air Force during World War II. He flew various types of aircraft during his service, including the A-24, the P-40, the P-51, and of course the P-38. Please welcome Second Lieutenant Bud Heiner, United States Air Force, retired.
Okay, so Bud and I are going to have a little conversation, and we have some wonderful slides that he told us about. Here we are. There's Bud behind us. And Bud, give us a little history about your experience flying the P-38 and how did you learn to do that?
Well, first of all, I got my training right here at Calero Fighter Training. So I feel right at home. Anyway, I was stationed over at San Bernardino, and they sent me up to Edwards Air Force Base and told me, you're on Air Base. So that was 1943. Long time ago. Anyway, okay. Anyway, I went up to Edwards and I was in operations there. So it wasn't long after I had graduated from flight training. So anyway, I was in operations and I looked out on the sight line and I saw a uniform blue P-38. I just brought it up from Turbine. And I thought, well, I could be able to fly my house. So the operations officer, he said, well, go ahead, we got to put some time on that plane. So I said, I've never flown one before. He said, well, now's a good time to start. Anyway, I went out there, got in it, I looked around, read the flight manual, and I thought, wow, 89 levers, instruments, and so on, and I thought, well, how am I going to have to figure out this deal? Anyway, I checked everything out, and the main thing I was looking for manifold pressures and trim tabs and landing gears and stuff. So I pretty well got a hold of that. So I took it out. I put about a quarter flat down and I rolled the elevator trim tab back just about 10 degrees. And anyway, I only used about half a throttle. Up at Edwards, it was on the dry lake, and if you went off the runway, then you go 5 miles. Any problem, because you're on that dry lake, farther to walk. Anyway, I rolled that plane down the runway, about 3/4 club. And it just took off so beautiful and smooth. I took it up to 12,000 feet. And I threw it around so that it had to be around. And after a while, I got to thinking, wow, I've got to learn how to land this thing. So I thought, well, I'll do this. I was at 12,000 feet, so I said, well, I'll stay up to this ground at 10,000 feet. So unfit. Came down to 10,000 feet. Then I took it back up to 12,000 feet, and I went around again, and I did the same thing again. So I took it down and had no problem turning it. Really beautiful. And that plane is something like that. Reminds me of a race car. You get it up there and it's fun to go. Up. It's like saying, hey, give me a little piece so I can go a little faster.
When you were doing that, give us a little bit of history about how the P-38 came about, like we talked in the paper today.
Well, it was back in 1937, 80 years ago, this month, that the Air Force came out with specifications. They said they wanted a new interceptor that would go to 20,000 feet in 6 minutes. And they wanted one that could go 360 miles an hour. So they gave Lockheed and Bell a chance to build one. Lockheed got the big going on it. They got to figuring out what they could do with it. And they thought, well, the Ellison engine at that time was only about 1,000 horsepower. So they thought there was no way that they could get that, no specifications with that engine. So they got to thinking about it and decided that they put 2 engines on. So that was kind of unheard of at the time for a fighter to be 2 engines. But anyway, that's what started the P-38. But as it came through, they started with 1,000 horsepower and finally got it up to about 1,475 horse. So it turned out to be a beautiful plane, but they had their problems. When they first started out, they had the tail shutter was terrible when you put it in the tires. The brakes were bad. They put the same brakes on a heavy plane and they had a smaller plane, so the brakes kept burning out. So that was the problem. And anyway, they went through all kinds of problems, so it took them about 8 months to get the plane going the way they wanted it.
You were here in San Bernardino at the Aero Flight School and working on Edward. Were you part of the test group that flew these planes to get them back to high speed so they could perform the way the pilots needed them to?
I was a test pilot in the air depot group, and we flew just about I had to really test these planes. I wasn't really a test pilot. I just, every time our outfit would repair a plane, I'd take it out there and change it.
Go back to the time that you were flying, and let's look at the, how did you call that? You asked for a tactical when you were at Edwards, was that correct?
I didn't like hot pilot, but I happened to think I was one time. I took a P-38 up from San Bernardino. I went out on the ocean for a while, around around about Santa Monica, about 12,000 feet. And I was going to head back to San Bernardino. I let down, and I let the plane go about before it was, and I picked up about 360 miles an hour. So I called San Bernardino for landing instructions. They said, land on runway 5. If there's the land, pilot should help us about see how it's going out there. Average is about 50. Anyway, I thought, oh boy, this plane really wants to go. So I called in and I said, how about a tactical? And they took the 3 minutes and they said, yeah, you're cleared for a tactical. So I just didn't pull out the back and I just laid that plane down. And then, so I guess I was doing about 400 miles an hour when I crossed the runway. I pulled it up and it went straight up to about 7,000 feet. I went down. I got to say that plane is a beautiful plane to fly. Anyway, pulled it up to Sherman. It's sweet to get back to where it was raining. That's what you call a tactical like that.
In other words, Tom Cruise and Top Gun has nothing on you, right? Okay. What about, let's look at, what happened to the P-38 that you and the squadron and San Bernardino repaired and refurbished? Can you tell us about that? About the squadron?
Well, we had an air depot block of what we do is bring in the damaged wreck. And we built it. So this picture you're looking at is the crew that fixed that plane. That plane came in at Morse Field on its belly. Like the props and the engines and undercarriage. So we had to rebuild the whole thing. Then I had to take it up to test it.
How long did it take to repair this P-38?
I think it's about 90 days.
Had to put a new engine in it, new wings, everything.
Yeah, everything. It's pretty badly damaged.
This squadron prepared the planes that got crashed that were being tested everywhere so they could go on and then ship them to Europe and Africa and CBI and all over the world where people need to meet it, correct?
I might tell you about one thing that the P-38 was good for so much. So over in the Pacific, that's where Richard Bowen, he was an ace. He got 40 zeros with a P-38. At one time, because it was in April 43, we had a listening station up in the Aleutians, and they picked up, and we had already cracked the Japanese code. So they picked up a message that said that Admiral Yamamoto, he's the one that was in charge of the Pearl Harbor thing, and he was in charge of the midway operation. Anyway, they got a message that he was going to fly down to Truck. His base was in Truck at the time. Going to fly down to Raval, and then he was going to fly from Raval down to Bougainville to make an inspection. We have P-38 stationed at Henderson Field in Guadalcanal. So they got this exact timing of Yamamoto, and they got, was it 18 P-38s set up in Henderson Field with drop tanks. I guess Yamamoto, they figured they'd be safe with the broken field because they figured he didn't have a fighter to build it for. Well, the P-38, the drop tanks, could make it. That was the only one. So they timed it just right. And Yamamoto picked up from Raval, and picked up two bombers. He and his vice admirals, they were each separate bombers. But anyway, then they put 6 fighters, Zeros, together. And P-38s, because we cracked the code, we know exactly what we did. They took off from Guadalcanal, and they just stayed out over the ocean so they wouldn't be detected. And they came in just about the time that Yamamoto's crew hit Bougainville. So that they took the 18 P-38s, they took 12 of them to stock cover, and 6 of them were down on the low, on the ocean. So, at the time that Yamamoto's bunch got over Bougainville, the 12 P-38s on the top, they got to Zeros, and then the big dogfight. So it left the bombers kind of on themselves, and the P-38s from the bottom came up and shot those the bombers out. So they killed Yamamoto. Anyway, it was quite a thing for the P-38.
Then and now, this was Bud. Turn around and look at this. Remember? Yeah. This is this wonderful P-38 that's right out here. We were at Nullah at the Air Force base at their air show in November for Veterans Day, and Bud spoke there as well, and he got to meet the pilots from here at Planes of Fame and see them again, and took them at the P-51 and the P-38. And when I was asking him, because all the time I've known Bud, now for about 10 years, I always thought that his favorite plane was the P-40. And when we were at Nullah, I looked at him and I never saw him smile so much until he saw the P-38. And tell us what absolutely is his favorite thing about the P-38.
The P-38 was just a beautiful plane to fly. Like I said before, it felt like a racehorse. It was wonderful. But I flew a lot of time in the P-51 too. I got to say that I can't say that I liked either one better. The P-51 is a beautiful plane too. One thing say about a P-51. That was great. P-38 has crops like that. The props on a P-38 go counterclockwise, so that it evens it out. A P-51 has that rose radiation and incorporated crop. It's got a lot of power, and it's got an awful torque. So if you say you're getting ready to take off, and you give it full power, putting just about off the runway. When you take off on a P-51, you better use about half throttle to start with, so you get the impact. And then you go. But the P-38 had no problem.
Thank you, Bud. Thank you all.
Okay, our next guest speaker is an aviation author, historian, photojournalist, and model builder. He's the author of Fabled 15, the Pacific War saga of Carrier Air Group 15, The Bridge Busters, the true story of the Catch-22 bomb wing, and his most recent bestseller, The Frozen Chosen, the 1st Marine Division at the Chosin Reservoir. He has books on sale today, but not many left because they sold out so quickly. Will you please welcome Mr. Tom Cleaver.
It's very glad to be here again. I'd like to take a minute and I want to introduce the newest airplane playing to fame. My grandnephew, Nathan Nelson. And anyway, so another generation of airplane pets. So we'll start with the P-38 here, and yes. This is Clarence Kelly Johnson, probably tied with Ed Heinemann for the best airplane designer in America. The P-38 is pretty much his airplane. Ian Hall Hibbert did it, but he was the lead designer on it. He went from the P-38 to the F-80, the first American jet fighter, to the F-104, which still looks like it's going a million miles an hour parked outside, and the SR-71, which really did go a million miles an hour. And anyway, he is America's premier guy. When they first designed the P-38, they were told they were going to be making 60 of them. So they didn't design it for mass production. It was basically a handmade airplane, which was a big problem. The fact that they managed to make 10,000 of them over at Burbank was really quite an effort. There's Glacier Girl. That's the oldest P-38 in the world, P-38F, and it's such an early P-38F that the canopy opens to the side. That's the one that went down in Greenland in 1942 and was found and put back together again. This is the XP-38, showed up in 1938, very different looking airplane. The original design was for a high altitude interceptor. There's two airplanes that came out of that competition, the P-38 and the P-47. They were both designed as short range, high altitude interceptors, which is why they both had turbo superchargers. And the thing with the P-38, the reason P-38 had two engines was they didn't have an engine that had more than 1,000 horsepower at the time. So they took two engines that had 2,000 horsepower. P-47 came along after the P-43, which was the first attempt at that, at what Republic was doing with a high altitude interceptor. And by that time they had the R-2800, which was 2,000 horsepower, so you only needed the one engine, and that's why P-38 has 2 and the P-47 has 1. The airplane had about 10 hours on it. Ben Kelsey was flying it. Kelsey is an interesting guy. You find his name on just about every American Army Air Force airplane that was flown in the late 30s, early 40s. As one of the first test pilots. But they had about 10 hours on this thing. Kelsey had about 2 hours on it. And they decided it was so good that why not go out and set a transcontinental speed record with it. So they flew from Burbank to Mitchell Field, New York, and while he was in the final approach, he ran out of gas. And that set the project back about 18 months because that was the only prototype. And that's Kelsey standing there looking at what had happened. This is the white P-38. They made 13 of these. There's a little bit of difference here. You'll notice if you look outside at the airplane, you'll see that there's a fairing here on the wing, and it isn't here. And they found out with that the airplane was unstable at high speed. That fairing just smooths the airflow right there between the cockpit nacelle and the engine. It was just a minor thing, but it made a big difference on the airplane. It made about 30 miles an hour difference in speed. This is another white P-38. By the time World War II came along in Pearl Harbor, there was a whole 65 P-38s in the entire Air Force, not one of which was capable of combat. There were the 14 white P-38s, there were P-38Cs, P-38Ds, and there was the 1st Fighter Group, which is out here at March Field in Riverside. And the week after Pearl Harbor, there was 2 fighter groups, the 1st and the 14th, and both of which were considerably smaller than the first had been. Then by the week after New Year's in '42, there were 3 P-38 groups when the 82nd was formed out of the 14th. At this point, each group had about 10 airplanes. And then in late January, they made the 78 fighter group, which had mostly P-43s and then P-38s. And they were producing P-38s as fast as they could. They'd fly them out of Burbank and fly them straight to the airport. They were based at 2 of them were based down at March Field, and 2 were based up at Hamilton Field north of San Francisco. The 14th and the 78th. And that was the entire air defense of the West Coast at that time. And it wasn't really until May that they finally got the P-38F, which was the first P-38 that was really combat capable. But by that point, they'd already discovered that the P-38 was not an airplane you wanted to die in, because it was so fast and was so clean it would go into compressibility. The nose would tuck and it would just keep tucking under. And the 78 in May of '40 was losing about a plane a week. Guys going in and being dug out at the bottom of a hole. That day there was an interesting event happening up there. The P-38 from Hamilton would often run across Wildcats that were flying out of Alameda Naval Air Station. And they'd get into little assholes over San Francisco Bay. And the Wildcats knew that they could always escape by diving under the Golden Gate Bridge, because the P-38s were told that they were not meant to be flying under any bridges. And so one day, a young second lieutenant who'd gotten there about a week before got in a hassle with the Wildcats, and the Wildcats went diving under the bridge, and he went right after them, right under that bridge, and he came back up, and he was so happy he did a loop and did it again. Then he went back flying, and he got back to the base, and the MPs were waiting for him on arrival, because the commanding officer of Hamilton Air Force Base had been in his car on the way to the field on the bridge when he did it. The pilot was told that he had better stock up on gold bars because it was highly unlikely that he was going to make it past second lieutenant. And besides that, he was being thrown in the briar patch and he had orders to New Guinea. Pilot was named Dick Long. This is what made the P-38 such a good fighter, with an airplane like the P-51 or anything with the guns in the wing. The guns have to be harmonized out to about 100, 200 yards out in front of the airplane to come together. With the P-38, they were harmonized from 5 feet out. And so the P-38 could take out an enemy airplane at any range up to about 500 yards, which is really quite good for a fighter. It had 4 50 calibers and a 20 millimeter cannon, and that was a very heavy armament at the time. Another thing that the P-38 had that surprised people when they ran across it, the other side of the runway, was Fowler flaps. These could be extended in combat, and it increased the area of the wing, and therefore made the airplane maneuverable enough to stay in the air. Most twin-engine airplanes really couldn't stay in the air competitively with a single-engine airplane. The Germans found that out with the Messerschmitt 110 versus the Spitfire and Hurricane. But the P-38 could do that, and as long as the P-38 stayed in the vertical plane, diving and zooming, it could do it. But it did not want to get into a turning circle, which is what they found out the hard way. But this is Burbank Air. This is actually Empire Avenue, south end of Burbank Airport. It used to be, they pull them out, and they would put them. If you've been up in Burbank, the line stretched down Empire Boulevard from Burbank Airport down to where down to nearly I-5 nowadays, where the railroad is, and they was covered with a camouflage net above it, so which you can't see it, so that from the air it looked like a golf course. There they are coming down the line. This is P-38 L's. This is once the P-38 was over in England, they found that it was a very good bomber, dive bomber, but they found out that if they could fly it straight and level and everybody bomb at the same time, they could get a good target. So they ended up building the Juice Snoot, which was P-38 up. P-38 minus the guns, and with a bombardier with a Norden bomb sight in the nose, and they would fly that plane as the lead plane, and when he dropped his 2 bombs, everybody salvoed theirs. This is the P-38M, which was designed as a night fighter. It had the guys that flew at radar position there, nobody could be over 5'5", because that's a very tight fit. Anyway, they had 2 squadrons of these, and contrary to mythology, they did not see combat, but they were supposed to go over Japan and as night fighter escorts for the B-29s on the fireworks. This is the P-38L, and what it had that the others didn't have, these dive flaps. With that dive flap, you could dive the airplane, and when it got into compressibility, you hit the dive flap and it slowed everything down, and the nose didn't tuck and you didn't crash. It also had hydraulic ailerons, so that as the previous speaker said, you could fly it one-handed. This this is the P-38 that everybody wanted to begin with. And it was the last one that finally showed up in summer of '44. And with the hydraulic ailerons and with the dive flaps, it could outfly pretty much anything it came across. Power stream. This is one of the most famous P-38 missions of the war, the mission that got Yamamoto. The painting that's supposed to be Rick Barber was flying his friend's airplane, Miss Virginia, and there was a lot of controversy whether it was Rex Barber or Tom Lanphier who shot down Yamamoto. Lanphier said that he saw the Betty and shot from the left side. Barber said he came in on the tail and shot him. They finally ended up giving both of them credit. But interesting enough, when Yamamoto's airplane was examined after the war in the jungles, they studied it in the 1990s and realized that all the killing shots were from the tail. So it was pretty much likely that it was Barber. But nobody's ever been able to conclude that. This is Admiral Yamamoto, who was the man who planned the attack on Pearl Harbor, and basically the mission of April 1943 was revenge. At that point, the United States was not raiding the Japanese military mail, although everybody says that they were. And the reason they found out that Yamamoto was making this trip to the South Pacific was they could still read the Japanese diplomatic mail, and there was and showed up in March of '43 that the admiral was coming, and here was his itinerary in the Japanese diplomatic. And so they decided, Admiral Nimitz decided they would get it, and there was one squadron they had on Guadalcanal, a 339 that could do it, the P-38. This is Yamamoto speaking to the Japanese pilot at the truck just before he left for that flight to Bougainville. These are the guys that shot him down. The P-39 fighter squadron. They were down here on Guadalcanal, and Yamamoto was coming into Bougainville, so they went out around so they wouldn't be spotted. And the whole thing was that they had to arrive at the right time, because they didn't want the Japanese to know that they had what it was supposed to be, that if anybody, well, they just happened to show up, and they just happened to shoot them down, and they did, and they got both airplanes. The second Betty had Admiral Matomi Yogaki aboard. He survived. Yamamoto went down. These are the three. This is Tom Lanphier, Tim Bisbee, and Rex Barber. Those three guys shot down the two Bettys. Nobody knows who shot down exactly which, but Barber's, as I said, Barber's claim is probably the most accurate. There he is again at the time. That's the airplane that he was flying. It was actually, it wasn't his airplane, it was a friend's airplane. And the interesting thing, a lot of people who are modelers, they wonder why is it, what happened to the paint with all this different colors here? Well, when the airplanes were sent overseas, they were cocooned. That's tape. That's to remind, and when they got there, they took the tape off there in Australia so they could open them up. They didn't worry about all the residue. That's what's it's the tape residue. This is another picture. This is Barber pulling off after shooting down the Betty. This is that's Barber. The other place that the P-38 was used was in North Africa. They originally were going to be sent to to England because they were going to be the long-range escorts for the 8th Air Force. They were sort of flying them across in July of 42, and once they had the crash landing on Greenland with the 6 P-38, they decided they would ship them by sea after that. And they got them all there in August of 42. They managed to make about 10 missions through September, and then they ended up being sent down to North Africa for the invasion. This is P-38 over North Africa. The P-38 in North Africa was not well used. They had a high loss rate because they didn't know how to fight. The 12th Air Force had the philosophy that they would be used as escorts and they would be flying close escort. And so the P-38s are down low with the bombers flying slow. The German, as Kurt Buligan said, they'd get a report from the front line that the Americans were coming across, and oh yeah, so P-38s, that they were unmistakable with the design. So they would know to get up high. They could make a pass on the P-38s before they could accelerate and get in the plane and in the fighting conditions. And they would shoot them down. The same thing has been done to the Messerschmitt 110 over the Battle of Britain when they were used as close escort by the Germans. And they also made the mistake of trying to fight the Germans on the horizontal plane, where the Focke-Wulf 190 could outfly a P-38 any day. And they had quite high losses. Even as late as August of 1943, on August 5th, two squadrons of the 82nd ran into two Staffels of JG-53 over southern Italy and lost 15 P-38s for no victories over the Germans. 10 days later, they lost 12. But finally, they learned what had been found out in the Pacific, which was stay in the vertical plane, dive and zoom, and that changed things further. In Europe, P-38 had, when they were flying in England, they had tremendous engine problems with them. They were constantly losing an engine blowing up. It's been figured out that in England they were using English avgas, which was not as high quality as American avgas, because they were flying in almost the same conditions in the Mediterranean as far as weather was concerned. But there they were using Texaco, and they never had any engine problems. This is a restoration done at Happy Jack's Bill Buggy. Jack Gilfrey was one of the pilots who went to North Africa. He was the first P-38 pilot in North Africa to become an ace, and he later went to the 20th Fighter Group in England after his first group. This business with the white nose, in England they would do that because and polish the nose, because that way they could be mistaken. The Germans couldn't tell which was the Droop Snoot that didn't have any guns and which was the P-38 that had guns. And they would paint that white and then polish the nose, and then it would be mistaken for a glass nose until hopefully a little too late. This is Gilfrey in front of his P-38 when he was with the 20th Fighter Group. This is the P-38's blackest day, the 10th of June, 1944. The Americans were trying to bomb the Ploiești oil field starting in April of 44. And the Germans, they were coming over with B-17s and B-24s, and the Germans would get plenty of warning, and they would light out smoke pots, and it was very hard to get a visual bombing on the oil refineries. So they decided they would come up with a smart idea. They would take the 82nd Fighter Group, and each one would carry one 1,000-pound bomb, a drop tank on the other side. The first fighter group would fly escort. They would make a low altitude attack, come in across Yugoslavia, come across Romania at 100 feet. They didn't realize that the Germans had a new radar station on an island, on the island of Vis, just off of Yugoslavia. They were spotted almost as soon as they left Foggia in southern Italy. So everybody was waiting for them. And this little airplane, the IAR-80, the only domestic airplane made by Romania, the Americans thought they were Focke-Wulf 190s. But on this day, they got caught at low altitude, unable to carrying a heavy load, and they ended up losing 14 of them. It's called the P-38's blackest day. That's actually a painting. That's Dick Wilsey, who used to live down here in Orange County. He got his engine shot out. He managed to get back home. It was the first time he realized that how much he really liked the P-38 because of that business about being able to get home on when you lose one. This is very interesting. That's Dick Wilsey in the front, and that's Dick Andrews in back. 4th of August, 1944, the second Operation Frantic shuttle raid that they made from Italy to the Ukraine. They ended up shooting up an airfield in Romania, and Wilsey got hit again in the engine, and he decided he'd make one more run, and he got hit in the other engine. And at that point, he was going in, and Dick Andrews, who was on his 10th mission, Wilsey was on his 59th, who said, "I'll come in and get you." So Wilsey crashes on the field, and Andrews, who as he later explained it to me when I did an interview with him 15 years ago, he was too green to know that was a really stupid idea. But he lucked out and he managed to land with the rows instead of across the rows in the plowed field, so he didn't break the nose gear off. And then he's taxiing along there's a company of Romanian soldiers on the other side of the field who start shooting and start coming towards him. Wilsey is running across the field chasing him. Andrews climbs out of the airplane, shuts his gear, and says to Wilsey, "You fly it." Andrews gets back in the airplane. Wilsey sits on top of it, and as he said, he could barely see the controls from the position he was in with his head underneath the windscreen. And they take up, and of course, I mean, it wouldn't be an airplane story if there wasn't a great big tree at the end of the room. But they take off across the plowed field, and the Germans and the Romanians are shooting at them, and it took them about 60 seconds to get that whole business organized in the cockpit. And they go to the top of the tree. When he landed at Poltava, there were still tree limbs and the radiators on one side of the airplane. They managed to get back, and they flew for 3 more hours up to Poltava and landed. The next day, this is the result of an hour, 60 minutes, of trying to recreate what they had done in 60 seconds. And that was as close as they could get. As Andrew said, it's amazing what adrenaline and fear can create. But interesting enough, as an end to that story, I think a lot of people remember the story of Barney Fisher, who won the Medal of Honor in Vietnam for picking up a guy. Well, it turned out that the commanding officer of the 609th Special Operations Squadron that Fisher was a part of was Dick Wilsey, by that time a colonel. Wow. And the guy who was flying top cover for him that day was Lieutenant Colonel Dick Andrews.
Wow.
These are P-38s of the 78 fighter group first arriving in P-38s first arriving in England. This is at Oxford. The 78 they had a year to train on the P-38 before they went to England. They got there. They were the last of the 4 P-38 groups to arrive. They got there at the beginning of December of '42. The other 3 groups had already been sent on to North Africa. So in January of 43, everybody who was the squadron commander or a flight leader and all the P-38 were sent to North Africa as replacements for the losses that they were suffering. And they got 42 brand new pilots and an airplane they'd never seen before, the P-47, and they were told they would fly their first mission in 6 weeks. No, that's true, it is. Yeah, it is. This is Dick Bong. This is actually probably in the United States because the Marge is different from what it was in. This is his time. But ended up he was the first Air Force pilot to equal Eddie Rickenbacker's score. He scored 27 by the spring of '44 in New Guinea. He came back to the United States on a war bond tour, and he said, "I want to go to gunnery school at Luke." The Air Force, until early 1943, the Air Force did not have gunnery school for fighter pilots. They learned it on the job. He went through the gunnery school. But at that point, he's the top Air Force ace. He goes to the gunnery school, and he then proceeded to fly around the bases, telling everybody, touting the word of gunnery school.